If God doesn't exist, then how did the universe begin with an explosion?
Wow. Starting right out of the gate with that one.
Yeah, I want you, the listener, to just think about that question for a second. Let it, let it kind of rattle around in your mind.
Because you probably heard some variation of it, right?
Yeah.
In a dozen different contexts. Okay.
Exactly. Maybe it was late at night in a college dorm or, buried in some combative social media thread.
Or dropped like a conversational grenade at a holiday family dinner.
Right. It is a massive, world-altering claim, but it's disguised as a really simple inquiry.
And if you're listening to this right now, we know you aren't here for the surface level summary.
No, you're the kind of inherently curious learner who hears a question like that, pauses, and immediately thinks, wait, let's look at the actual foundation of that premise.
Which is exactly why today's deep dive is custom built for that exact mindset.
We are unpacking a really thought-provoking set of excerpts translated from an essay titled Science versus the God of the Gaps.
And our core mission today is to dissect the mechanics, the history, and the psychology behind that specific question.
Right, but before we get into the mechanics of cosmology or theology, we need to set the framework for how we're approaching this.
It is absolutely crucial that we do that, because the sources we're working with today dive very heavily and very critically into the debate between theism, specifically creationist viewpoints, and modern scientific cosmology.
So as your guides on this deep dive, we need to be explicitly clear we are not taking a side.
Right. We are not endorsing one viewpoint over another, and we aren't here to validate or invalidate anyone's personal religious beliefs.
Our role is strictly analytical. We're going impartially into the architecture of the author's argument.
We want to unpack the robust historical references and the deep philosophical questions presented in this source material, simply to help you fully understand how the original author deconstructs this very common argument.
Exactly. And the foundation of our deep dive today rests on an incredible stack of references.
Oh, it's a monumental stack.
The author of our primary translated article is drawing on foundational concepts from Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time,
The particle physics detailed in Steven Weinberg's The First 3 Minutes,
the cosmological mechanics from Alan Guth's Inflationary Universe,
and broad scientific syntheses in Sean Carroll's The Big Picture.
plus philosophical heavyweights like Bertrand Russell's Why I Am Not a Christian.
It's a lot of material.
It is. We are synthesizing all of this to understand how modern physics and philosophy intersect to reframe that core question.
So let's jump right in.
Okay, let's unpack this. The author actually starts by attacking the very framing of the question itself, arguing that it represents a massive misconception.
That framing is exactly where the critique begins. The essay points out that this question, if God doesn't exist, how did the universe begin with an explosion, is rarely asked in a spirit of genuine scientific curiosity.
Right, it's not a real question. It's delivered with this overwhelming sense of confidence.
The author notes it's frequently used as a sort of religious trump card.
Like an inescapable trap for the non-believer or the scientifically minded person.
But the text observes a very subtle psychological tactic at play here.
Yeah, the word explosion.
Exactly. By phrasing the origin of the universe as a mere explosion, the challenger is deliberately framing the scientific explanation as something chaotic, random, and, frankly,
A bit silly.
yeah, a bit silly. They want to contrast this supposed meaningless accident with the ordered, majestic, and intentional narratives found in ancient scriptures.
It is a total rhetorical sleight of hand. The challenger assumes that by pointing out the apparent absurdity of an explosion, miraculously creating everything you know, creating planets, DNA, consciousness, they have automatically proven that a divine creator must exist to orchestrate it.
But the author immediately pulls the emergency brake here.
They point out that this question isn't the brilliant theological checkmate people think it is.
Because it reveals a fundamental, catastrophic misunderstanding of the science.
It reveals that the person asking doesn't actually know what the Big Bang is.
Right. The word explosion is entirely the wrong word.
What's fascinating here is how the brain visualizes that word. When a person hears explosion, the human brain immediately pictures a bomb going off.
We picture a singular point in space, maybe a giant stick of dynamite or a cosmic firecracker that suddenly detonates.
In that mental model, there's a clear center of the blast,
There's a violent shock wave pushing outward.
and there's debris flying through pre-existing empty space.
We imagine shrapnel tearing through a dark void.
But the text is incredibly firm, backing this up with Weinberg and Hawking. That is absolutely categorically not what the Big Bang was.
I always struggle to visualize this without the right tools, But the analogies provided in the text are fantastic.
The Big Bang was not an explosion in space. It was the expansion of space itself.
The text stresses that there was no center to the event.
No outward moving shockwave.
And, crucially, there was no pre-existing emptiness, no empty room for the stuff of the universe to fly into.
Instead, it was an event where every single point in the universe expanded away from every other point simultaneously.
Space itself was stretching.
To visualize that stretching, the sources often use the balloon analogy.
Right. Imagine a deflated balloon.
And you draw a bunch of little dots all over its surface with a marker. Those dots represent galaxies.
Now you start blowing air into the balloon. As the rubber stretches, every single dot moves further away from every other dot.
If you were standing on any one of those dots, it would look like all the other dots were rushing away from you.
But none of the dots are the center of the expansion.
The surface itself is stretching.
Another classic analogy is raisin bread baking in an oven.
As the dough rises and expands, the space between the raisins increases.
The raisins aren't exploding into the oven. The medium they are embedded in is expanding.
So the universe didn't explode into a larger container. The container itself just got bigger from the inside out.
Exactly.
But playing devil's advocate for a second, a skeptic might say, okay, balloon, raisin bread, whatever. It's still just a wild, untested theory made up by modern atheist scientists to get rid of God. Does the text address the origins of the theory itself?
It does, and this is where the author drops a brilliant historical irony.
I love this part.
This concept of the expanding universe isn't some brand new, cutting-edge, untested atheist theory. It is nearly a century old.
And the person who first mathematically proposed this model.
The idea that the universe was expanding from an incredibly hot, dense primordial state, which we now call the Big Bang,
Was a man named Georges Lemaitre.
and Georges Lemaitre was not a militant atheist trying to dismantle religion.
He was a devout, ordained Catholic priest.
A Catholic priest. The foundational theory of modern cosmology, the very concept so frequently used as a straw man by creationists to mock science, was formulated by a man of the cloth.
Lemaitre was a brilliant physicist and astronomer who deeply understood Einstein's theory of general relativity.
In the 1920s, he realized that Einstein's equations actually predicted a universe that was either expanding or contracting.
Einstein himself initially hated this idea.
He really did. He believed the universe was static and unchanging.
He even introduced a cosmological constant to force his math to reflect a static universe.
Einstein famously told Lemaitre that his mathematics were correct, but his physics were abominable.
But Lemaitre held firm to the math. And the text notes that Lemaitre's theories didn't just exist as abstract concepts on a chalkboard.
They were rigorously tested and observationally confirmed.
Right, the text points directly to Edwin Hubble's observations in 1929.
Hubble looked through the massive Hooker telescope in California and actually measured the redshift of distant galaxies.
He observed that almost all galaxies were moving away from us, and the further away they were, the faster they were receding.
This was the physical observational confirmation of Lemaitre's stretching space.
And the author doesn't stop there. They also point to the 1965 discovery of the cosmic microwave background radiation by Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson.
That discovery is the absolute nail in the coffin for the static universe idea.
Penzias and Wilson were working with a massive radio antenna in New Jersey, trying to map radio signals from the Milky Way.
But they kept getting this persistent, low-level static buzz in their instruments.
It was coming from everywhere, in every direction, day and night.
They even famously thought it might be pigeon droppings on the antenna causing interference, so they went out and scrubbed it clean.
But the static remained. What they had accidentally discovered was the literal afterglow of the Big Bang.
It was the residual heat signature left over from that initial rapid expansion of the universe.
Cooled over billions of years into microwave radiation, spread uniformly across the entire sky.
So the science backing this up isn't just guesswork. It is incredibly robust and multi-layered.
So if the science has been this well documented for nearly a century, and it was literally pioneered by a priest, why do modern debaters continually reduce these elegant mathematical models down to a cartoonish single explosion?
Why insist on using this distorted picture?
The author's argument is that this reductionism is a deliberate tactical distortion.
If you can convince your audience that modern science teaches that a random hand grenade went off in an empty room,
and magically accidentally created a perfectly tuned universe with spiral galaxies and DNA.
Well, then science looks incredibly foolish.
It's setting up a straw man so absurd that anyone would reject it.
The text makes the case that they do this to force a false dichotomy,
They need the scientific origin to look like a messy, chaotic accident so they can contrast it with ancient scriptures.
which often describe highly choreographed events.
Like a deity literally physically separating a localized heaven from an earthy ground, or sweeping away primordial waters.
The author suggests they are trying to force a 21st century astrophysical reality to fit into a Bronze Age literary framework.
And when the square peg doesn't fit the round hole, they mock the peg rather than update their understanding of the hole.
That deliberate misunderstanding sets the stage perfectly for the next major philosophical battleground in the text.
Because once the challenger has set up this false premise and you try to explain the actual mechanics of the Big Bang, they usually pivot and spring a trap.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The author identifies this trap as one of the most famous and heavily criticized logical fallacies in theology.
We are talking about the God of the Gaps fallacy.
The argument usually takes this shape. Okay, fine. Maybe it wasn't a bomb. Maybe it was the metric expansion of space.
But you scientists admit you don't know precisely why the universe started expanding in the very first fraction of a second.
You don't know what initiated it. You have a gap in your knowledge.
Therefore, God must be the first cause. God is the answer to the unknown.
I can honestly see why that argument is so appealing to people. It feels like a logical conclusion.
If we see a result, there must be a cause. And if we don't know the natural cause, a supernatural one feels like a safe bet.
But the author goes hard after this logic. If we connect this to the bigger picture, they absolutely dismantle it by looking at the historical track record of human ignorance.
The author asks us to zoom out and look at how humans have historically dealt with the unknown.
For thousands of years, humans have encountered phenomena that either terrified them or completely baffled them.
And in nearly every single instance, the default explanation was supernatural.
The text provides some devastating historical parallels. Let's really dig into them. Think about thunder and lightning.
To ancient humans, a massive booming sound coming from the sky, accompanied by deadly flashes of light that could set a forest on fire or kill a person instantly, was completely inexplicable.
There was a massive gap in their understanding of the natural world. So what filled that gap?
Oh, God. Thor swinging his mighty hammer, or Zeus throwing thunderbolts from Mount Olympus.
And what about disease? Before humanity understood microbiology, before we had any concept of bacteria, viruses, or germ theory, diseases were terrifying mysteries.
Imagine a sudden plague sweeping through a village, killing half the population while sparing others, seemingly at random.
To a pre-scientific mind, that looks exactly like a targeted, conscious punishment.
So the gap in medical knowledge was filled with demons, witches, curses, or an angry deity demanding sacrifices.
Or consider earthquakes. The ground beneath your feet, the literal foundation of your reality, suddenly and violently shaking.
Obviously, without knowledge of tectonic plates, that must be Poseidon, the earth shaker, throwing a tantrum.
Or the intricate movements of the planets in the night sky.
Before Newtonian gravity or Einstein's relativity, highly educated humans thought angels were literally pushing crystal spheres around the earth.
The essay also touches on the darker, more tragic side of this historical trend by bringing up mental illness.
Without an understanding of neurochemistry, structural brain abnormalities, or severe psychological trauma, individuals exhibiting erratic behaviors, seizures, or hallucinations were frequently diagnosed as being possessed by evil spirits.
They were subjected to horrific treatments, exorcisms, burnings, trepanation.
Literally drilling holes in their skulls.
Right, to drive out the supernatural entities that had supposedly taken up residence in those gaps of medical knowledge.
The author paints this vivid historical picture to highlight an undeniable trend line.
As human knowledge systematically increased as we developed atmospheric science and electricity with Benjamin Franklin.
As John Snow and Louis Pasteur proved germ theory.
As we discovered plate tectonics, orbital mechanics, and neuroscience.
These supernatural explanations didn't just quietly shift, they collapsed.
They were completely eradicated and replaced by natural, testable understanding.
The track record of science versus the supernatural is literally undefeated when it comes to explaining physical phenomena.
And this leads to a fascinating logical challenge the text presents, a concept they call the shrinking deity.
The author issues a profound challenge to anyone using this argument. If human ignorance is your primary proof for a creator, if your God only exists in the spaces where scientists currently say we don't know yet.
Then mathematically and logically, your God must inherently get smaller and smaller as scientific knowledge expands.
That is the fatal flaw of the God of the Gaps argument. It hostage ties theology to scientific ignorance.
The author is essentially asking you a very pointed question. Why should this current gap, our lack of a complete, unified theory regarding the exact origin moment of the Big Bang, be treated any differently than our ancestors' ignorance about what caused thunder?
What makes the cosmological gap sacred while the meteorological gap was just a temporary lack of data?
The essay questions why ignorance is suddenly treated as a theological advantage.
It is a highly precarious position to take, to essentially say, the less humanity knows about the mechanics of the universe, the stronger my proof for God becomes.
But let me play devil's advocate for a second. A believer might say, but wait, isn't the origin of the entire universe fundamentally different from thunder?
Thunder is just weather. Disease is just biology.
The Big Bang is the genesis of reality itself, the creation of time and space. That requires a first cause that exists outside of nature.
Does the author address that leap?
Yes, and that brings us to the next major section of the text, the first cause dilemma.
The author says, okay, let's play along. Let's give the argument the absolute benefit of the doubt.
Let's assume that the universe did require a distinct initiating cause to trigger the Big Bang.
The text then executes a brilliant philosophical pivot, it asks. Even if we concede there is a cause, why on earth does that cause have to be your specific God?
This is where the leap in logic becomes staggering.
The text points out that we can hypothesize many potential first causes that do not require a conscious, intervening, personal deity.
The author lists several alternative explanations derived directly from modern theoretical physics.
We could be looking at quantum fluctuations.
In quantum mechanics, we know that particles pop in and out of existence in a vacuum all the time. It's not just theory, it's observed in phenomena like the Casimir effect.
The universe itself could be a massive quantum fluctuation.
Or we could be looking at the interactions within a multiverse.
In theories like eternal inflation, our universe is just one expanding bubble among an infinite froth of other universes, constantly expanding and spawning new realities.
Or, the author suggests, it could simply be raw, natural phenomena completely devoid of any conscious intent, operating on laws of physics we don't fully comprehend yet.
The author's point is this: jumping from the universe has a cause to, therefore, a highly intelligent conscious being created is already a massive unsupported leap.
But jumping from the universe has a cause to, therefore, the specific God described in my particular holy book is the one and only true creator, is a leap of logic that absolutely shatters the bounds of reason.
This raises an important question. The text highlights a massive, almost comical disconnect between cosmology and specific religions.
Let's say astrophysics eventually proves there's a prime mover, some foundational force that initiated the expansion of space-time.
The text adamantly states that finding a cosmological prime mover absolutely does not equate to finding a deity who demands scheduled praise.
It does not point to a creator who dictates what humans are allowed to eat on certain days of the week.
Who cares deeply about what fabrics our clothes are made of?
Or who intensely monitors human sexual behavior.
The author asks us to truly reckon with the scale of the universe to understand the absurdity of this leap.
We're talking about an origin event that spawned an estimated 2 trillion galaxies,
each containing hundreds of billions of stars,
expanding over 13.8 billion years.
The sheer scale is hostile to human comprehension.
And yet the theist argument is that the entity responsible for this unfathomable, mind-bending cosmic machinery is simultaneously obsessed with the dietary restrictions or bedroom habits of a hairless primate living on a tiny rock,
orbiting a completely average star in the quiet suburbs of the Milky Way galaxy.
The essay argues that abstract cosmology simply does not and cannot support a micromanaging, highly personalized deity.
Furthermore, the author points out the sheer inefficiency and absurdity of a prime mover who supposedly orchestrates the entire cosmos, but then chooses to reveal the ultimate truths of existence by whispering them exclusively to a select few prophets.
In a specific geographic region of the Middle East, thousands of years ago, before the invention of the printing press,
if this being created the universal laws of physics, like gravity or electromagnetism, which apply identically everywhere from Earth to the Andromeda Galaxy, why is its ultimate message of salvation distributed so inefficiently inconsistently, and ambiguously across humanity.
This leads to the author's direct challenge to you regarding inherited belief.
They ask you to genuinely examine the foundation of why you believe what you believe.
Is the firm insistence that my specific religion's creation story is the true one a conclusion you reached based on logical reason, comparative analysis, and empirical evidence?
Or is it merely inherited? Is it an accident of geography and birth?
The text pushes very hard on this point. Why do people insist their specific version of God is the only true one, while entirely rejecting the thousands of other creator gods worshipped throughout human history?
If you were born in a different country, to different parents, would you be arguing just as passionately for a completely different creator?
If the first cause of the universe is universal, why is theology so fiercely tribal and localized?
It's a profound critique of religious exceptionalism. Everyone claims their specific revelation is the authentic one, and all the others are mere myths.
The author suggests this glaring inconsistency alone should give us serious pause when someone tries to use the Big Bang to validate their specific dogma.
So if that argument fails, where does the author go next?
They transition into how we actually make progress in understanding the universe, contrasting the scientific method with the demand for absolute answers.
I really love this section because it highlights how modern science operates perfectly well without invoking the supernatural.
Science doesn't require worship or theological frameworks to explain reality.
The text references the bibliography to dive into some specific, highly successful frameworks that explain natural phenomena without needing a creator.
Let's unpack some of these, starting with Alan Gough's theory of cosmic inflation from 1981.
I love how the author uses inflation to counter the fine-tuning argument.
The theory of cosmic inflation proposes that in the very first, minuscule fraction of a second after the Big Bang, the universe underwent an exponential, mind-bogglingly fast expansion.
It expanded faster than the speed of light. Now, why does that matter?
Because before inflation, cosmologists had the horizon problem.
They looked at the universe and saw that it was the same temperature everywhere, perfectly uniform.
How could that be unless it was precisely divinely tuned?
Gough's inflation theory solved it using pure physics. It showed that the universe was briefly small enough to equalize in temperature, and then inflation blew it up so fast that the uniformity was locked in.
It solves a major cosmological problem using natural mechanics, not divine intervention.
Exactly. And the text doesn't stop there. It also references quantum cosmology, specifically the work championed by physicists like Stephen Hawking and James Hartle.
This is incredibly complex but fascinating. They attempted to apply the rules of quantum mechanics, which usually govern the bizarre probabilistic world of subatomic particles, to the entire universe at the exact moment of his birth.
They propose models like the no-boundary proposal.
Okay, let's pause here because no boundary proposal sounds incredibly dense.
It does. If the universe doesn't have a distinct beginning point in time, how does that even work? How did Hawking picture that?
It breaks our intuitive understanding of time. Hawking used a brilliant geographic analogy.
He asked us to imagine walking south on the surface of the Earth.
You keep walking south, eventually hitting the continent of Antarctica, and finally you reach the South Pole.
Now, what is south of the South Pole?
There is no south. You can't go further south than the South Pole.
Precisely. The concept of south ceases to have any physical meaning at that point.
Hawking and Hartle argued that time behaves the same way near the singularity of the Big Bang.
As you rewind the clock toward the absolute beginning, time itself rounds off.
It doesn't have a sharp starting edge where you can point and say, before this there was nothing, and then God said, let there be light.
Just as there is no point south of the South Pole, there is no time before the Big Bang.
Time itself is a property of the universe. It began with the universe.
So asking what caused the universe before it existed is a nonsensical question because the framework of cause and effect requires time to operate.
The author uses these examples along with concepts like vacuum energy and mathematically predictive models to show that science has robust frameworks that don't require magic.
And the contrast the author makes here is stark and undeniable. None of these incredibly successful scientific models require a human being to pray for them to function.
Gravity doesn't need your belief to keep you tethered to the ground.
Cosmic inflation doesn't require faith to explain the uniformity of the cosmic microwave background.
And critically, the essay notes, none of these scientific models rely on the threat of eternal damnation or hellfire to ensure you accept them.
They rely entirely on evidence, mathematics, and peer-reviewed observation.
This leads the author to compare two fundamentally different approaches to the unknown.
The text contrasts the attitude of the scientific enterprise with the attitude of dogmatic religion when faced with a profound mystery.
Science looks at the vast, unexplained cosmos, looks at the gaps in our knowledge and says, here is what we know.
Here is the data we have collected.
Here's exactly what we do not know yet.
And we will keep searching, keep testing, and keep revising our models as new information comes in.
Science embraces the not knowing. The not knowing is the very fuel that drives the engine of discovery.
Right. And religion, according to the source, takes the exact opposite approach.
When faced with the same mystery of the cosmos, the religious approach is stop asking.
We already have the answer. The answer was written in this ancient text thousands of years ago. The Creator did it.
The author views this as intellectual surrender. They make the case that claiming God did it is fundamentally a thought-terminating cliché.
It doesn't actually advance human knowledge by a single inch.
The author calls it the stagnation of God did it. And if you look back at our historical examples, the danger of this stagnation is obvious.
If early doctors had simply accepted that diseases were demonic punishments and stopped looking for natural causes, humanity would never have discovered germs, antibiotics, or life-saving vaccines.
If early astronomers had just accepted that angels pushed the planets, we would never have launched satellites, understood orbital mechanics, or landed on the moon.
The essay argues that inserting God into the gap doesn't contribute anything to science or human progress. It simply stops the questioning process.
It is the end of curiosity. Admitting ignorance is an act of intellectual courage, whereas claiming absolute knowledge without evidence is a retreat.
So what does this all mean? If the math is this solid and the history of scientific progress is this clear, why do people still use this explosion argument?
Why is the need for a creator so deeply entrenched that people will aggressively fight against the physics?
The source actually drops the cosmology here and transitions to look at human psychology. What is the emotional core driving this?
It's a deeply empathetic transition by the author. They suggest that if you strip away all the furious debates about cosmic inflation, background radiation, and quantum mechanics, what is really driving the insistence on a creator isn't a search for objective truth, but a search for comfort.
It is driven by fear.
The text explores the intense psychological terror of an indifferent universe.
When we look up at the night sky and truly comprehend the scale of it, the billions of light years of cold, dark, empty, irradiated space, we realize that the universe is unfathomably vast, and it is entirely indifferent to us.
The universe does not care about our hopes, our anxieties, our successes, or our failures.
The cosmos is not actively hostile towards humanity. It is just breathtakingly, entirely apathetic.
And for a human being, that apathy is existentially crushing.
We have to remember our evolutionary biology. We are creatures hardwired by millions of years of evolution to seek connection, to find meaning, and to identify patterns.
It's an evolutionary survival mechanism called pareidolia.
If early humans heard rustling in the bushes, the ones who assumed it was a predator with intent survived, even if it was just the wind.
We are biologically programmed to assign conscious intent to random events because it kept us alive.
But when we apply that same biological programming to the vast emptiness of the universe, the resulting existential dread is overwhelming.
The author analyzes this psychological reflex beautifully. They suggest that inserting a god into this vast emptiness creates a necessary illusion of intent.
It takes this terrifying, chaotic, random uncertainty and imposes a grand, comforting plan onto it.
It transforms the cold, uncaring void into a cosmic nursery designed specifically for us.
The text refers to this as a cosmic comforter for our deepest fears.
If there is a god, then even our most profound suffering has a purpose. Even the vast emptiness has a reason.
It makes a hopeless void feel hopeful, and it makes blind belief feel emotionally safe.
The author acknowledges exactly why humans desperately crave this narrative.
But empathy doesn't equal validation. The text delivers a stark, uncompromising reminder. Comfort does not equal truth.
Just because a story makes you feel warm and safe when you look out into the terrifying dark does not make that story factually accurate.
The universe is under absolutely no obligation to provide a narrative that soothes our existential anxiety.
And this leads to a profound philosophical challenge from the author.
If the universe does not inherently provide us with a prepackaged meaning, if there is no cosmic scriptwriter giving us our purpose from on high, the text challenges the theist to ask, why not take responsibility and create our own meaning instead of relying on a prepackaged one?
It is a call to existential maturity,
Right.
echoing philosophers like Sartre and Camus.
The author is asking why we must rely on ancient texts, written by people who didn't know where the sun went at night, to tell us why we matter.
Why can't we find deep, profound meaning in our relationships, our art, our scientific discoveries, our compassion for one another, and our brief, shared time on this planet?
Creating our own meaning requires effort, responsibility, and courage.
Accepting a prepackaged, divinely ordained meaning is easy, but according to the source, it is ultimately intellectually dishonest because it relies on filling a gap with a comforting myth rather than facing reality.
Which brings us to the final incredible synthesis in the text. This is where the author brings together causality, modern science, and a very specific cultural philosophy that I found fascinating.
Let's summarize the science first. How exactly does the text wrap up the physics side of this argument?
The author summarizes the cosmological arguments by stating firmly that the universe expanding from a hot, dense state points strictly to physics.
It points to matter, energy, space, and time working according to mathematical laws of relational interactions.
It operates on cause and effect, entirely devoid of any observable conscious intent.
The text concludes that an unexplained origin, a current limit to our mathematical models or observational capabilities, is not a legitimate passport to simply insert a deity.
It is merely a boundary of current knowledge, waiting to be pushed further.
But then, the author does something brilliant. They point out a unique cultural connection.
The source material references the concept of Dhamma, specifically Buddhist Dhamma, using the Thai term Buddhahama.
It highlights that both modern scientific cosmology and Buddhist Dhamma align perfectly on one fundamental principle: causality.
The text focuses heavily on the concept of idapakayata, which translates to dependent origination or causes and conditions.
This is a vital philosophical connection that broadens the scope of the deep dive.
The author is pointing out that you do not need a Western monotheistic framework to understand existence or to have a complete philosophical worldview.
Both modern science and Dhamma seek to explain physical and mental phenomena without ever needing to reference divine creation, supernatural intervention, or a cosmic scriptwriter.
In Dhamma, the universe operates on natural laws of cause and effect. Think of a seed growing into a tree.
The tree doesn't arise because a God commanded it to. It arises due to the proper causes and
The
conditions.
seed, the soil, the water, the sunlight, it is an intricate web of interdependence.
It's a beautiful synthesis. In that framework, there is no need for a prime mover to initiate a linear sequence, because the sequence is seen as a complex, potentially cyclic web of interdependent phenomena.
It shows that ancient wisdom and modern astrophysics can actually shake hands, provided that the wisdom isn't demanding a micromanaging creator god to fill the gaps.
And this leads right into the author's closing argument on human humility.
The text grounds us by pointing out the cosmic scale of time. Human lifespans are incredibly comically brief.
We've been doing organized empirical science for, what, 400 or 500 years?
Yeah.
Out of 13.8 billion years of cosmic history.
We are absolute toddlers in the cosmic sense. We have barely opened our eyes.
Therefore, the author argues, we will always be learning. We will always have gaps.
And because we will always be learning, the author makes the case that admitting we simply do not know yet is the highest act of intellectual honesty.
It is a virtue to be celebrated,
Conversely, the text frames the alternative as deeply shameful.
claiming absolute, unquestionable knowledge about the origin of the cosmos without a shred of empirical evidence.
Twisting robust scientific data to force it to fit into the narratives of ancient myths.
And passing off inherited, geographically dependent blind faith as objective fact. The author considers this a profound intellectual betrayal.
It is a powerful indictment of absolute certainty in the face of mystery.
So let's take a breath and summarize this incredibly dense journey we've been on.
We started by dismantling a false premise, the deliberate tactical misconception that the Big Bang was a random, explosive bomb in space, rather than the elegant, metric expansion of space itself.
We watched as the God of the Gaps argument shrank under the relentless historical light of scientific progress, moving from explaining thunder and disease to retreating all the way back to the very first fraction of a second of the cosmos.
We examined the massive illogical leap required to get from a theoretical first cause in physics to a specific, micromanaging deity concerned with human diets and geography.
We saw how modern physics, through inflation and quantum cosmology, operates perfectly without a creator.
And finally, we uncovered the emotional core driving the argument. the deep evolutionary psychological need for comfort, intent, and meaning in the face of an unfathomably vast and indifferent universe.
The real value of this deep dive for you, the listener, is in the analytical toolkit it provides.
The next time you encounter a massive, confident claim posing as a simple question, if God doesn't exist, how did the explosion happen?
Yeah.
You now have the framework to dissect it completely.
You can examine the false premises of the physics, you can spot the historical gaps in logic they are trying to fill with the supernatural, and most importantly, you can question the underlying psychological anxiety that is actually driving the argument in the first place.
You do not have to accept the premise of a loaded question.
You can confidently look at that question and say, your question assumes facts, not an evidence, misunderstands the science, and relies on a logical fallacy.
It is an incredibly empowering intellectual stance. But before we wrap up today's deep dive, we want to leave you with one final provocative thought.
We spent this entire time talking about the universe out there, the cosmos, the Big Bang, expanding space. But what about the universe in here, inside our own heads?
Consider this. Today, we explored how ancient humans used gods to explain external mysteries like thunder, disease, and earthquakes, and how modern debaters use God to explain the origin of the universe.
But if the human brain is so fundamentally hardwired by millions of years of evolution to seek out patterns where none exist,
To aggressively assign conscious intent to random events.
and to desperately crave comforting narratives to survive the psychological crushing weight of an indifferent universe.
Is the ultimate gap we need to explore not out there in the cold cosmos, but buried deep within our own biological programming?
And if science does one day fully mathematically explain the exact origin of the universe, leaving absolutely no room for a creator, will we simply invent a brand new gap just to feel safe?
That is definitely something to chew on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the cosmos, human psychology, and the intellectual courage it takes to look at the vast unknown and simply say, I don't know yet.
Keep questioning the premises, keep exploring the gaps, and most importantly, keep learning. Until next time.
Farewell and stay curious.